so I can
Okay.
upload it in YouTube.
Okay,
Because,
done. Okay, done.
okay, thank you very much. Okay, okay, I am so sorry for this inconvenient situation. So, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and thank you very much for coming to this open discussion time. And I would like to say a huge thank you for Pedro to uh, to to participate, to become a speaker in this discussion, because this is our second open discussion, and hopefully this kind of activity will be continued in the future. So uh, please, Pedro Dono, uh, 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 try to give us a clear point of view regarding to this research, and hopefully the researcher in Indonesia can have a clear uh, image about what kind of research that technology enhanced learning really is. Okay, thank you, Pedro Dono. That's my opening speech, and the next is your time to, to do the presentation, and the time is yours.
Sure. So I can't screen share though.
Okay. Afif San, can you allow Pedro to share screen?
Hmm.
Can you do that, Pedro? No, not yet.
I still can't.
Okay. Afif San, would you
Yes.
allow Pedro to share screen?
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. You can try it again.
Okay, I can do it. Okay, can you guys see the slides?
Okay. Yes, I can. I can see the slide.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
Okay, so those slides are my PhD defense. First, hello everyone. Good afternoon, I guess. It's probably afternoon in Indonesia, I hope. Yeah, so I didn't prepare any special slides for today, but I'll try to just go through the parts that I find are important because there's like 94 slides. I'm not going to go through 94 slides. And honestly, I would prefer if you guys have any questions, or if you guys want to talk, I would prefer if you guys just interrupt me because it's better than if I just keep talking all the time and no one is paying attention, etc., etc. So if you guys have any questions about me, about my research, about the way I do things, you guys, if possible, just interrupt me. Just say "shut up, Pedro," and then you can ask the questions and stuff. It's really no problem. Okay, but I'll start going now. So, so I've spent 5 years at University of Hiroshima doing research, and through that time, I was always looking for a way to do research fast. So not just do research like not just do what the teacher tells me to do, but always thinking about how can I do research in a way that I can publish many papers, I can do a lot of experiments without wasting time. Because what I found out is that if you do research, usually there are many things that happen, there are many people that you have to wait for, so you usually waste a lot of time. And I was always thinking about how to do research in this field without wasting time. So yeah, so through that, I was building multiple systems. So for my PhD defense, I talked about two systems that I built. One of them is Kindergarten Montekun, which is a system for learning math for very young kids. And the second system I did research on was KitBuild. I didn't actually create KitBuild, but I did some research with KitBuild. And so, yeah, I'm gonna start talking about that a little bit. So the introduction, I guess. So the theme of my research, because I was a PhD student, right? So I can't just like I have two different systems. I need to explain why those two systems are part of my thesis. So that was one of my concerns when making my thesis, is because so I have two different systems. They are not related, kind of. So I need to make up a reason as to why those systems are related. Like, why is my thesis two systems, not just one system, etc. So the way I went about doing that is because so Kit Build already exists. It's already a system out there that people use for education. And Monsakun is also a system out there that people use for education. And I didn't create those systems from zero, but I changed something about those systems so they are usable in other contexts. So that's what I talk about in my thesis. So instead of building a system, what I say that I do is that I take two systems and I try to change them into something else, into something that can be usable in other contexts. So yeah, but the reasons why I did that, the reason why I changed those systems is I say that, for example, you have different languages, you have users who cannot read, you have high mental load. By users who cannot read, I mean specifically very young kids who cannot read. Not adults cannot read, even though they are adults who cannot read. But anyways, so yeah, so sometimes you have to change the application to something else, right? So one approach for design and learning applications is the information structure approach. So that approach it's used in the lab that me, Ando, and Afif, and also Ario, I think Ario is here. The lab we used to belong to, I guess. Ario is still there, but no one else is there, I guess. And the person who came up with that is called Tsukasa Hirashima. He does research in this field, and what we find is that like there are some conferences that we usually go to, and the difference between Hiroshima Sensei's approach and other people's approach is that usually people will try to focus more on AI, machine learning, and new technologies uh, like virtual features, and many things which are very technologically advanced. I would say that in other laboratories. So people are trying to work with the latest technology to try to do something. But Hiroshima Sensei's approach is more like it's not. It doesn't look so impressive technologically, so it might not look so interesting for engineers because it's very simple. The applications are really simple. But the way we build the applications is in a way that we expect that people can think about that deeply. So on this approach, on Hiroshi Sensei's approach of philosophy, we are not so concerned about new technologies. We are more concerned about how to make people think deeply. And we don't necessarily need to use the latest technology to make people think deeply. So that's kind of Hiroshi Sensei's approach. The problem with that approach is that it's a bit complicated for the research to be recognized by engineering people, people who work mainly with engineering. But at the same time, I think it's more interesting because you are thinking more about what the student is thinking about instead of thinking about the latest technology. So yeah, so his approach is based on manipulating information structures. So usually you have programming code that manipulates information structures. But with Hiroshima Sensei's approach, we have the student manipulate those information structures. So it's not like we have the students program something, but we have the students manipulating something. And then when they manipulate that thing, they usually have to think about things quite deeply. So uh, when we start worrying so much about the latest technologies, we usually worry about the psychological background of the research. So, for example, in this slide, I'm sitting like Vosniadu, Pitt. So the people I'm sitting here, they are psychologists. They study how people learn. They don't study the latest technology. And even like I don't have the years here, but I think this is 2000, and this is like 94, so 97. So it's very old research. It's not like the latest craziest thing, but it's more like how education has been built up through the years, how people think, how people learn. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the latest research because it's education and people's mind doesn't change that much. People's brains are the same, right? 100 years ago now. So, so this is a slide that I used to try to explain how this approach works. Like we have the user here, right? I don't know if you guys can see my mouse, but yeah, you have the user here and then you have the user's mind who's trying to comprehend something. And then what we say on the information structure approach is that we believe that inside the brain of the student there is an information structure. This is kind of complicated stuff, but we can't prove that there is information structure that. But we try to model the information structure in the application to be similar to the information structure inside the user's mind. The thing is that we don't actually know if there is an information structure in the user's mind, but we are not so worried about that because we are more thinking about what kind of things the student can think about when they're trying to build those information structures. So this is kind of a complicated. You guys don't have to worry so much about this. I'm just explaining that Hiroshima Sensei's approach is worried more about what the student thinks about and not so much about technology. So yeah. So I talk about some stuff about MVC. I don't think this is so important because it's just something I had to put in my thesis to explain why what I choose about the applications, etc., etc. It isn't so useful for you guys. I'm just going to skip this. And so this slide, I'm still talking about how I changed one application to another application, but the model is the same. It's just kind of complicated stuff, but it's not so important, I believe. So yeah. So now I'm introducing now the system I built. So it's Kinegara Mosokun. So I took the original Mosokun, which is an application for people to learn about math, kind of. And I changed the application for young children to be able to also study math. So the thing about Mosokun is that a lot of research has been done on Mosokun. So Afif has also done research on Mosokun. And so the difference between my research and Afif's research is quite big because Afif's research, at least in the past, I don't know what he's doing now, but the papers he wrote in the past, it was more about analyzing the behavior of the students. Like, so the thing about the thing about the information structure approach is that you have pieces, and then people are supposed to think about those pieces. But the good thing about that is that we can use the log data, which means that the way the student interacts with the system, and we can try to use that log data to explain how the student thinks. And a lot of people in the lab, in Hiroshima Sensei's lab, they do research like that, and Afif also did research like that. So I think you guys probably know Afif's research by now, I believe. But instead of doing that, what I did actually is that I took Mosokun and I changed it into something else. And then I also analyzed the log data in Mosokun. I did actually for this research, my approach was more similar to Noor's research, Hassan and Noor's. I don't know if you guys know her, or if you guys are cooperating with her or not. But I read her papers and then I was like, oh, this technique is pretty interesting. Maybe I can use that technique for something nice with this system. I could have used a fifth technique on my system, but I felt like if I do that, it would be like later research because it's a bit more advanced, I guess. And but the approach that Lucian used was more simple. It was easier to use, and it was very easy to see some kind of learning by the students. So in Mosokun, I think I have a screenshot somewhere. So this is Mosokun. And the thing about Mosokun is that it has text. So you have a bunch of cards and then you use those cards to make up a story. And the thing about Muslim, like I said, it has text, and I wanted for very young children to be able to use that. So I wanted to change from text to pictures. So my approach with that was, okay, I talk a lot about what I did, but it's not so important. So what I did was I used pictures. So I designed the pictures, and so so most of them you have a bunch of phrases, right? The phrases is a card. So what I did was that I changed the card into the picture. So here is a phrase of the original Mosakun, and then I changed that into those pictures. And then, like Mosakun, you have three phrases to make up a story, but here I have three pictures to make up a story. So this way, the student can interact with those stories, but without being able to read, which is nice, right? And I also have a big picture. So the thing about Mosakun is that you have the story divided into three sentences. But for this season, I have the story divided into three pictures. But I can also have the story be represented by a big picture. So we have the big picture here, and then we have the three small pictures, and those pictures represent the big picture. And it also represents this expression. So in this story, you have Bob. So Bob brings a watering can to the shelf, and there is already a watering can in the shelf. So you have a watering can before, and then Bob brings a watering can, and then you have two watering cans in the shelf. So that's pretty much how it is, right? So yeah. So this is those pictures, they are used in the application, but this is the actual screenshot of the application. This is an easier level, so it's just for the student to hear something and then try to pick the card. But this one is the actual main part of the application. So you have like a big picture here, which represents the story. And then you have to make up that story out of three small pictures. So as you guys can see, this is quite different from, I wouldn't say quite different, but it's a bit different from the original Mosokun, because with Mosokun you have text, and that makes it for a different problem. But in this one you have pictures, so it's hard to know if it's easier or if it's harder to understand, because I don't know, depending on the person, the text would be easier. For some people, the pictures would be easier. But the thing is that for kindergarten, the students can't read in Japan. So it simply made sense to use the pictures. They just can't use the text. So yeah. And so this would be a comparison of Musakun and the kindergarten Musakun. So yeah, as you can see in the kindergarten one, there really is no text. But if you click on the sound button, you can hear the sound, which is a computer-generated sound. We didn't use just any computer-generated sound. The lab bought a software to create very high-quality artificial sound. So yeah, we did that. So here are my research questions. So I guess I don't know how much I should go into this, but so usually when you research, before you do the experiment, usually you want to define some research questions that will guide your experiment. And so usually, like I was talking about before, you want to measure the learning gains. But sometimes it's not easy to do that, because depending on the situation, you have restrictions in the school, right? So sometimes you want to do an experiment, sometimes you want to use the system, and usually what you do is that you have a pre-test, and then you have a post-test, and then you have a control group, and you have an experiment group. That's usually the default approach for those things. But you start having issues when you cannot do whatever you want, because the school doesn't want you to do whatever you want, right? So in Japan, this is a very big issue, actually. That's the reason why I stopped doing experiments in schools, because my teacher wanted me to do the experiments in school, but I always felt like a lot of time was wasted and I could not do the experiment just like I wanted, because there were a bunch of restrictions. So what happened actually in the lab back in Japan is that the students in the lab would go back to their home country. So a lot of people went back, for example, to Indonesia or to Thailand to do the experiment, because in Japan it's really hard to do the experiment the way you wanted to. So you would go back to your home country to do the experiment. And so yeah, usually you want to measure the learning gains, but that doesn't mean that's the only way you can do research. So if you look at Afif's research, he only works with the log data. So he doesn't work with any pre-test or post-test or anything like that. So even though the standardized way, the default procedure is to have a pre-test, a post-test, and then you have a control group, an experiment group. So, but you don't have to have those things to research. And a lot of the very interesting research right now is just about the log data. It's just about analyzing the behavior of the students. So we are no longer necessarily concerned about how much people learn using the system, but we are also concerned about how they learn, what they think about when they're learning, and also like when they don't learn, why don't they learn? Like how can we explain when they learn, when they don't learn, when they get stuck, when they don't get stuck, or something like that. And so for this experiment using the kindergarten Mosakun, I was doing it in Japan. So I had 19 Japanese kindergarten students divided into 3 classes, etc. And I just couldn't do whatever I want, and I couldn't even have a pre-test and a post-test, let alone a control group. So I had so many issues, but I could still write the papers. The reason why I could write the papers is because I was doing an approach solely based on the log data. And so my research questions here are, can they use this application? How do they respond to the application? Are students aimlessly interacting? Like, are they thinking about it, or are they just randomly interacting? And do they show growth by using the application? So I'm talking about what happens inside the application. I'm not talking about what happens outside the application, because when usually you have a pre and post test, what you're trying to do is that you have people use the application and then they change. The pre-test score gets higher on the post-test. But for this specific experiment, I'm just trying to analyze what people did inside the application. If they did something interesting, if they did something useful, or if they didn't do something interesting and useful. So yeah, so for this experiment, people were introduced to the application for 10 minutes, and the participants interacted with the application. And then I take the data, which is just log data, the way the student use the system, and then I analyze that log data. And I do some comparisons with gaming the system type of behaviors. So those gaming the system type of behaviors, they are like when the student is trying to abuse the system to try to solve the problems in the system instead of actually thinking about what they're doing. So for this situation, I compared the way the student acted with what if the student was just randomly trying to solve the problems, which is the behavior which is bad, right? If the student is just trying to blah, 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 try to solve the problem, that's not good. And then I try to compare that, the worst behavior, with the actual behavior of the student. So here is my graph explaining a little bit about what I got here. So the white one is the actual measured metric, the metric I got from the log data in this system. And the gray one is the metric I got from calculating how much it would take for the students to solve those problems if they're randomly solving the problem. So in this graph, we have the number of attempts here. So this is the number of attempts the students take on average to solve one problem in the application. And it's divided by levels, right? And the gray one is the gaming the system one with the calculated one. The white one is the one from the application. The one I actually calculated using the log data. And the gray one is mathematically calculated without using the log data. So as you guys can see, the students can solve the problems much faster than they would be able to solve the problems if they were randomly trying to solve them. So from this calculation, what I want to show is that there is a very high probability that the students are thinking about how to solve the problems, and not just randomly trying to solve it. So this is like a way to see it graphically, right? So this is a graphical way to see this, but usually when you're doing research, you don't want to do it just graphically. You want to show it mathematically that this is an actual thing that's happening. It's not just a coincidence. So the way to do that is that you have several statistical analyses to show that something is not a coincidence, that something is actually happening there. And so what I did is that I used the t-test, which is a very standardized way of doing those things. And I do it level by level. So the application has multiple levels, and each level has multiple questions. And I do this calculation for each level. And usually when you do a t-test, there are many things you can look at, but what we usually concerned about is the p-value. So the p-value here is really low. The p-value would be the probability of this thing happening by chance, and the probability is really low, right? It's 0.001. So the chances of the students being better than the game in the system thing is kind of high. So that's what I want to argue with these results, right? I want to argue that people are thinking about things when you're doing when you're using the system, because the performance is so good that it's statistically different from the randomly generated performance. And this one is for the number of attempts, right? And I do one more thing, which is the number of problems that the students can solve in one try. So the more problems the students can solve in one try, is the higher the understanding they have of those problems. Because if they can solve a problem in one try, that means they understand the problem in a high way, in a high level, because they can solve those problems really fast. So I have also for different levels here. This one is for the levels. This one is for level 3, level 6. So if you do it randomly, the amount of problems you can solve in one try is really low. You have like 20% chance, around 20% chance here. This one is like around 10%. And for other problems, you have around 30-40%. But the students can solve a lot more problems in one try. Like the students can solve the level 3 problems like 50% of the time. They can solve it in one try. And for the level 6 problems, which is like the hardest level, they can solve it almost 100% of the time, even though if they did it randomly, they would be able to solve it like only like 10%. So as we can see, the students really outperform the random metrics. So that means that we can be pretty sure that the students are not randomly trying to solve the problems. They're trying to actually think about it and then try to solve the problem in a very efficient manner, I believe. So I also did the same thing I did the statistical analysis for the attempts, and I'm also doing the statistical analysis for the number of the ratio of problems solved in one try. So it's pretty much the same thing I was talking about before, and did some t-tests. And here I have something else I did. So this, I don't actually remember how similar this is to the analysis that Noor did, but this was pretty much inspired behind her analysis, which is like showing how the students have trouble at first when they face hard problems, but after they face that initial difficulty, they can solve the problems much faster. So what we have here is that we have 11 problems of level 3, okay? And the different colors here show the different difficulty of the problems. So for the white problems, the white has trouble, they're pretty easy, and they don't take a long time to solve the problems. But when you get to the gray problems, they take a lot more time to solve these problems for the first time. But when they try the problem again, it's a different type of problem, obviously. They can solve it much faster. And then it gets even harder, and they take even more tries to solve those problems. But that's only for the first one. When you go to the next one, they already can solve it much faster. So as we can see here, the students are not only thinking about how to solve those problems, they are also getting better at solving those problems. The more they understand the problem, the more they understand the application. So what we get from these results is that the students are doing much better than they would do it if they were just randomly trying to solve stuff. And that shows that students are thinking about it deeply. So in this experiment, we are not concerned about the learning, about the pre-test, post-test, etc. We are more concerned about how the students are thinking about the problems and how the students overcome the difficulties in the problems. So for this research, I could publish a conference paper and a journal paper. So as you can see, you can do research with something that is not necessarily have pre-test, post-test, etc., etc., etc. You can see the research was just about data. Yes, so that's it. If you guys have any questions on mobile support, you guys can ask it now, you guys can ask it later, I don't know, anytime. And now I'll talk a little bit about Kit build. So Kit build is a completely different system. So Ando has done research on Kit build, so maybe you guys are already familiar with Kit build, I'm not sure. But my research is kind of different from everybody else's research, I guess, because on Kit build you have many things you can do with Kit build. So in the lab, in the previous lab, some people worked with Kit build and video. Some people work with Kit build and like confidence tagging, and there's so much research about Kit build. But what I did was, because I was using Kit build and then I didn't like Kit build, so I was having a hard time using Kit build. I didn't want to participate in the experiments. I got really stressed out when using Kit build, and I started thinking, how can I make Kit build easier to use? That was my goal in this experiment. So I was not concerned about learning so much. I was more concerned about how can I take this application, which I don't like to use, and make it into something that I could actually like to use. So that was my motivation for Kit build. So I changed Kit build from something that has manual layout, so you can drag and drop the things. That's the usual Kit build. That's the Kit build that Ando used in these experiments. So it's just like, it's usual stuff, like you just drag and drop things. But I changed it into a way that you don't have to drag and drop anymore. Everything is automatically arranged for you. And yeah, that's how it went. So Kit build is about concept maps. So this is the concept map, kind of. And I'm not going to talk so much about Kit build right now, but it improves learning in many ways. Concept maps can improve learning, blah, blah, blah. This is a screenshot of Kit build. So you can drag and drop those things. This is just a screenshot, so I can't drag and drop anything right now. But yeah, usually you can drag and drop the links and the concepts and stuff. And then, like usually in concept maps, you can build the concept map freely. But what I did, Kit build, you cannot build it freely. You already have it predefined before. But Kit build is really good for learning. And it's even better than the regular concept maps. If you think about retention, if you think about the memory, like remembering the information. So yeah. So we have many explanations on why Kit build is good. I'm not going to talk about that. Maybe Ando can explain that better, I think. But one thing that I found with Kit build is that if the maps are big, okay, if you have big maps, people have a lot of trouble with those maps. I had a lot of trouble with those maps. I really had a hard time. I really didn't like using Kit build. So I started to build a new interface to try to solve the things I didn't like about Kit build. So I made up a new name for that, which is called AirMap. So you would have Kit build and then you would have AirMap. And then I had to do 2 experiments for this research. And yeah, so for the first experiment, I could show that Kit build has a lower cognitive load. So you guys don't have to worry about what cognitive load is. Because if you guys want to know what cognitive load is, you guys can just go to Wikipedia or buy a book about cognitive load. But what I want to talk about here is that I wanted to make life easier. I want to make it easier for people to build the maps on Kit build. And the reason why I use cognitive load is just a way to show that this life being easier is actually less effort, less mental exhaustion. So it's less problematic to build the maps with AirMap and with Kit build. And I wanted to show that in a way that people like, it's not just about, oh, you use it, oh, it's easier. No, I wanted to show actual numbers to prove that I actually did something different, that it's actually easier to build the maps with AirMap or not. And then I had to do a second experiment to show that the differences in reading comprehension gains. So for this experiment, unlike the previous one, I actually show the learning gains and I compare the learning gains of Kit build with the learning gains. So when Kit build would be the control group, AirMap would be the experiment group. So my Kit build research is more standardized, I guess. It's more comparable to research in other labs. And my research for Conceptual was just related to the log data, to the behavior, etc., etc. But for the one for the kit build, I did the actual standardized approach, and I like that better. And the reason why I could do that with kit build and I could not do that with Conceptual, I will explain later, but you guys will understand soon why I could do a more complete research with View, and then I had to do a more shallow kind of research with Mosaic. So I used experiment 1 and 2 as one journal paper, and then I also published another journal paper on some exploratory research that I did on the log data, and I have 3 more papers on these experiments. I did more experiments related to this, let me just close line for a while here. Okay, so all in all, with this, I had to do some additional investigations, but all in all, with this line of research, I could publish. No, actually, I have 2 papers published, and I have 3 papers waiting for response. And so I could have like 5 papers with this type of research, of this type of approach. So I think it's really, how can I say, really efficient. It's a very efficient way to research, in my opinion, because you don't waste time, you don't have to wait for people, etc., etc. I'll talk about that later. Okay, so this is the interface I built. This is called AirMap. And the difference between KitBuild and AirMap is that on KitBuild, you have to drag and drop. On AirMap, you just click on things, and then everything kind of, how can I say, rearranges itself automatically. So on AirMap, I force the user to do this automatic thing. So the user cannot turn it off. The map will always arrange itself. And on KitBuild, you usually don't have automatic layouts. And so it was kind of like with automatic layout or without automatic layout. But lately, so KitBuild has been, a lot of people have built their own versions of KitBuild. And recently, Ario has built his own KitBuild. And on Ario's KitBuild, the thing that you find is that you have the usual KitBuild, but you have a button for the automatic layout. So it's kind of a hybrid approach, kind of. So AirMap, you always have the automatic layout. KitBuild, usually you never have the automatic layout, but on Ario's KitBuild, you have a button, and then you can just turn on the automatic layout for that particular time. And then it's not always turned on. It's just using it one time, and then it organizes the map. And yeah, so yeah, that's pretty much what I did. I made the layout automatically arrange itself. And then I argue that by doing that, I lower the whole load. And let me just make this. Okay. So here is a comparison. Here you have KitBuild, you have AirMap, and then I talk about some stuff that's a bit complicated. I'm not going to talk about that so much. Okay, so for my experiment, I had 60 participants, and I recruited them through Amazon Mechanical Turk. So Amazon Mechanical Turk was kind of my my response to the problems I had with research. So I'm really proud of using Amazon Mechanical Turk. I always try to convince people to use Amazon Mechanical Turk. And the reason why I use Amazon Mechanical Turk is because I don't want to have to go through the trouble of organizing students, of talking to teachers, asking people to collaborate with me. Because the truth is that I'm bad with people. I don't like waiting for people to do things. And I like to do the research as fast as I can with just my own time. And what I find out by looking at my colleagues and even my own research is that I was waiting a lot for people to answer my emails, for people to schedule the experiments. Like I'm doing research, okay, and then I'm like, it's like October or November, and then I'm talking to the teachers, I'm trying to do something, and then they're talking about doing an experiment in February. To me, that's ridiculous. I don't want to wait until February, because what happens is that I'm doing an experiment and I don't know if that experiment is going to go well or not. And I want to publish the papers fast. I want to be able to publish the papers in an efficient way. And I feel like the best way to learn how to write a good paper is to send the paper, and then you get the reply, and then they will explain everything that is wrong with your paper. But you're not going to get the reply if you don't send the paper. And so everything in research, like the way you learn, the way you evolve as a researcher, you need to do things, you need to act. And if you have to wait for people, you don't act. So you don't grow, you don't write papers, you don't evolve, you don't learn how to make better research, etc., etc., etc. So what actually happened when I was in Japan is that I had many systems. I went through many systems, many approaches. I wanted to do the research on the kindergarten. I wanted to do the research on the high school, on the preschool, etc., etc. And I tried to do those things as fast as I could. I tried to talk to people, convince people, but I just hit into the walls. Like people did not want to let me do the experiment if I wanted to do the experiment. They had a bunch of rules, they had the time, etc., etc. It just can't be helped. So what I did, I started using Amazon Mechanical Turk. So what is Amazon Mechanical Turk? So the thing about Amazon Mechanical Turk is that you pay people. Those people are not students. They are normal people, regular people, and usually those people are from the United States of America, kind of. And so what I do is that I pay people in America to use my system and do my pre-test, post-test, etc., etc., etc. So what happens here? I'm using money instead of using time. And the reason why I can use money instead of using time is because my lab back in Japan, they used to finance the experiments. There was no problem there. And so I just prefer to do the research there. And so everybody gets a win there, right? Because the people who do the experiment, they get paid to do the experiment. The lab will waste some money of the lab, but the lab is happy because I can write the paper faster, I can write the paper more efficiently, and there's no problem there. And I feel like this problem is even bigger in Japan, but I feel like in maybe Indonesia or other countries, it's not such a big problem because maybe people are easier to work with in Indonesia. They don't have so many rules. They're not so strict about very small details. So I feel like maybe Indonesia this will not be a big problem, but I still feel like it's much better to be able to do an experiment without leaving my chair. I feel like this is really important because I don't have to work with people, I don't have to talk to people, negotiate, etc., etc. And I feel like some people are concerned about paying the people, the participants to do the experiment, and they are not actually students. But what I find out, depending on the class, is that the students in the class are less reliable than the students in those experiments because what I see sometimes is that the students are really relaxed. And a colleague of mine was doing an experiment, and what he find out is that a lot of people skip some parts of the experiment. They don't do everything in the experiment, so you cannot control people, right? But when you're doing a mechanical Turk, people are really scared because if they don't do the experiment well, they are afraid they're not going to get paid. So what happens is that people want to get paid for sure, so they try to do the experiment well. But what happens in the sometimes in the classroom is that people don't take the experiment seriously. They are just joking around. They are skipping stuff, etc., etc. So yeah, you guys can Google Amazon Mechanical Turk, and I'm really happy to use Amazon Mechanical Turk. If I was doing research, I would definitely try to do research, but I can do with Amazon Mechanical Turk. But the thing about Amazon Mechanical Turk is that you cannot do any type of research there because the thing is that you cannot have children working for you, right? That's absurd. So if you want to work with children, you have to go to the high school, to the preschool, etc., and then you cannot use that. But if you were doing research that you can do with adults, then you should definitely use Amazon Mechanical Turk, in my opinion. But that being said, there is another solution to this problem, in my opinion. So the other solution to this problem is to analyze log data. And the reason why that's possible is because sometimes you have those big blobs of data, like a lot of people do the experiment and they have some data, and then you can just analyze that data. And log data is something really rich, depending on the system. So for KitBuild, I found out that the log data in KitBuild is not so good to analyze. Like it's really complicated, but for the log data in Mosakun, which is we talked about Mosakun, right? So for something like Mosakun, the log data is really rich. Like you have a lot of things that you can talk about, and you can really see the thought process of the student in Mosakun because it's a more compact system. In you have a lot of things, and those things they're not so deep. Like people don't think so deeply about those things. because you have a lot of nodes, you have a lot of links, etc., etc. But on Mosaic, you have a very small amount of cards, and the student has to really interact with those cards a lot to be able to solve those problems. So you are definitely able to work with the log data in Mosaic in a very deep way, so you can write many papers with that. And you can do that from your chair, which is really important. And for me, at least, it's really important to be able to do research at your own pace. And Afif, his research in the lab was mainly about log data, and I think that's really efficient way to do research because you don't have to wait for anyone, you don't have to be concerned about how people are behaving or trying to control people, etc., etc., etc. So that's another approach you can do. You can work with log data. It's a very hot research field right now because people are really concerned about the behavior of the students, not so much about, we're not so concerned anymore about how, if the students are learning or not, we're more concerned about how the students learn, what they think about when they're learning, how to help people learn, how to save people who are not able to learn, etc., etc. And I think research is a lot like that, and I feel like that's a very efficient way to do research. So in my opinion, if I'm going to do research, there are only two ways I would do research. Mechanical Turk or log data analysis. Anything else is just a waste of time because you have to worry with so many people who don't do what you wanted to do, etc., etc. So yeah, I feel like that's the most important thing I can tell you guys is that, in my opinion, the way to do research efficiently is by doing those things. Yes. So this graph is just an explanation of the experiment, like the flow of the experiment. So for this first experiment, I had a 1 week delay between what happened. And yeah, so you have the pre-test here, the post-test here, and then you have a delayed comprehension test. So this one is about understanding, and this one is about memory, kind of. So I have two things here. I have the immediate understanding, and then I have the delayed understanding. Then I have some analysis to show that our map has lower cognitive load than heat build. What I mean by lower cognitive load is that air map is easier to build the maps on air map than it is on heat build. And I did that with kind of a complex analysis. You guys can look it up in my paper if you guys are curious about that, because I use 4 metrics at the same time. So I had to use a MANOVA, which is a very complicated thing, etc., etc. But anyways, you guys can look it up in the paper if you guys are curious about that. And so my results show that our map has lower cognitive load. But with this experiment in specific, I could not know anything about reading comprehension and retention. So when the students did the post test and the delayed comprehension test, I had ceiling effect, so everybody would get a very high grade. So I couldn't say anything about that. So yeah, so I did a second experiment. And for the second experiment, I redid the materials. I used a harder material so that people would not get a perfect grade. And then I did the experiment again. It was a very similar experiment, but I did it with a harder setting. So this is the result. So this is the p-test. As you guys can see, the p-test is really similar. And then you have the post-test, which is kind of similar, but not so much similar. But it is not different. Statistically, it's not different. But for those two, it's different. So this is the post-test, this is the pre-test, and this is the delay test. So if you just use the system, there's no difference. But after 2 weeks, after the 2-week delay, you see a difference between the scores. So the gray one is for air, and the black one is for kit. So what this tells us that air map is easier to build the maps. You have an easier time. You're happier for building air map, in my opinion. But what you find out is that after 2 weeks, you learn less. So you know less than people who use kit build. So what I want to say here is that it's better to use kit build if you are worried about memory. If you're not worried about memory, you should just use air map because it's easier to build the maps with air map. So yeah, I did a test that showed that there are no differences in immediate learning, but there is a difference in 2 weeks in the memory. So yeah, I talk about the implications of this, that kit build is harder to use air map, but there is some memory enhancement there. And yeah, so the contribution of my research is that organizing the layout and closed concept maps helps user remember information. So after 2 weeks, people remember more. And then people can use these results to know how to better design those tools. And also on automatic layouts, if people should use automatic layouts or not. And then I talk about some stuff like additional analysis. I'm not going to talk about this, but yeah, I do some deeper analysis on the learning. I'll just say what I find out. Is that for new knowledge, there's no difference between KitBeard and AirMap, but there is some difference in previous knowledge. So for KitBeard, you see that the previous knowledge decreases in the same rate. So this is the decrease after using the tool, and this is the decrease after 2 weeks. But for AirMap, it decreases just a little bit after using the tool, but after 2 weeks, it decreases a lot. So that's the difference between KitBeard and AirMap. It's easier to forget what you already knew. But if you talk about what you didn't know and then you learn, there's no difference between KitBeard and AirMap. So I explain why this happens, so you guys can read in the paper, I guess. I don't want to talk so much about that. So now I close out my thesis by explaining how I changed KitBeard, how I changed AirMap, how all those things make sense. And yeah, then I talk about how it would be good to generalize the results, etc., etc. This is not important in my opinion. But this is the end of my presentation. So yeah, so I spent 6 years in that lab. And it took me a long time to realize the problems that there are in the research and how I can solve those problems. I had a lot of trouble with wasting time. I don't like wasting time. And then I wanted to write a lot of papers. I wanted to write the papers fast so I could get a good visa, so I could, I don't know, in the future become a teacher. And the way I could do that was by thinking about the problems I have and how to solve those problems. And I never, how can I say, I was never just relying on my teacher, because if I just relied on my teacher, I think I would be able to graduate, but I would be able to graduate in a more slow pace, and I would like, how can I say, it would be more risky. So I took some risks by myself. I thought about what to do. I made my own decisions, and then I could publish things faster, and I was pretty happy about that. So that's another advice I would like to give people, I guess. Don't think so much about what the experts know, because sometimes the experts, they're so used to the old way of doing things, and they don't think about how to do things in a new way, how to think outside the box. And yeah, sometimes you can do things faster, you can have an easier graduation, you can have better research performance, you can, I don't know, get a promotion if you're a teacher, if you think about how to do research faster, not just how to do research well. Yeah, that's my presentation, I guess. If you guys have any questions, if you guys want to talk about anything, just hit me up. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Pedro, for your interesting presentation. So if any of you have some question, please don't hesitate to ask. And do any of you want to ask, or do you have something in your mind that you will do not understand? If no, okay, I would like to open the question. It was a very interesting subject. I get some several points that I kind of miss or maybe forget, because it's quite a long time since I heard your presentation. So I would like to remembering, or would like to remind myself. And so you are talking about the gaming the system concept, right?
Yeah, gaming the system.
Measure the Monsakun. So basically, the gaming the system is like creating the. Correct me if I'm wrong, right? My understanding about the gaming the system is like creating the highest step that could possibly done in some level. Is that true?
Yeah, like in a random way.
Yes, in the random way. So there is a calculation method for it, right?
Yeah.
So basically, you will have a high, the most, not most, the higher.
Well, not the most. It's actually the average.
Or the average.
Yeah.
Of the possibilities, step possibility being taken by a something or someone in
Yeah.
current stage.
Yeah.
So you compare it to get to compare with your system, and in this case, Monsakun. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, it is acceptable for the journal, right?
Yeah.
Is there any specific question regarding to the GTS?
What do you
In
mean specific questions? You mean from the reviewer?
yes, from the reviewers, maybe.
Okay, so usually when you send the paper, there's some luck, right? You have
Okay.
some people who really like the paper, you have some people who don't like the paper.
Okay.
And
Yes.
yeah, so I feel like a lot of people, I think in the conference, a lot of people talked about that. Like I was comparing to the worst possibility, like the dumbest thing you would compare it to, because if you're trying to solve it randomly, you're really not thinking about anything, right? And a lot of people said that my result would be better if I had a pre and a post test. And I totally agree with that. And I wanted to have a pre and post test, but I couldn't have a pre and post test. So yeah, I feel like the hottest research right now is the research that has the pre-test, the post-test, and the behavior. So if you have just the behavior, it doesn't feel complete because, like you said, like, is that enough for a journal paper or not? Or it depends on the reviewer, right? Some reviewers are happy about it. Some reviewers are really like, oh, this is not good. Depends on the person. So I feel like the best research right now is a combination of pre-test, post-test, control group, etc., and also the behavior.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And I also have some specific question about how to determine the level of difficulties in Monsakun that you made. Do you have any collaboration with the teachers, or you just
Yeah.
determine it by yourself or something, or whether it is the difficulties was based on the task or the activity, or also being based on the content itself? I don't know how to measure the difficulties in your system.
Okay, so for this most consistent, we did a very tight collaboration with a teacher,
Okay.
a math teacher, and so we would, how can I say, for the build research, I made every decision by myself. Usually, I would make the decision, and then I would just tell my teacher like, hey, I did this, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that, and then he would say, okay. But for the kindergarten also consistent, yeah, for the kindergarten also consistent, I had a lot of trouble because everything I would do, the teacher would have to accept what I did. So if he says that's not good, I would have to change it. I would have to make it again. But yeah, so because of that, I actually feel like the kindergarten system and the Mosokun that I made, it was more successful. It was more, how can I say, very good for the children because that teacher, he had a lot of experience with the children. So the difficulty of the problems, so Mosokun, you have dummy cards, which are like fake cards to distract the students. And you have three spaces, right? But for my system, I limited the number of spaces. So for the easier problems, you have just one space. So it's kind of easy to solve. But then I increase the number of spaces you can use, and then up to three, right? And then when you have three spaces, that would be the hardest questions. Yeah.
Okay. So basically, it's being determined by the teachers. You said about
Yeah.
the
Talking.
teachers. Okay. Okay. And I want to talk about the kit build. Okay. Now we change our subject to the kit build. So actually, I kind of forgot how you measure the cognitive load on the air map.
Okay. So
Is the base part that you do.
I had four metrics for cognitive load. One of them was the time it takes to build the map.
Okay.
The second one was the number of actions it takes to do.
Okay.
The third one was how hard the student feels it was to build the map. So I asked the question, how much effort did you put into building the map, etc., etc. The other one was how difficult it was. So one is effort, the other is difficulty. So I asked the student how difficult did he feel it was to build the map.
Okay.
So I have those 4 metrics, and then I use the 4 metrics at the same time in one single statistical analysis. Yeah, that's it.
Okay. So okay. Ridwan, I believe will become the
What?
new member of lab. Ridwan is there?
The new guy who's coming to Japan, right?
Yes, yes.
Yes, yes, yes.
And basically maybe he will continue the research regarding to the kit build, and actually he have some confusion regarding to the kit build. So do you have any suggestion or any something about your experience? You said that you are frustrating and you don't like kit build. So maybe
I didn't like to use skip build.
yes, maybe based on that kind of feel, you can have, okay, Ridwan, you should do this because I don't like it.
Okay, I think, I'm not sure, I was talking to Ariel about it some time
Okay.
ago,
Mm.
but Hiroshima Sensei, so I was doing research in the lab, right?
Mm.
And I just left the lab.
Okay.
And I just finished writing my last paper, and I was talking to Hiroshima Sensei, and obviously I have a lot of ideas for new papers, right?
Okay.
And Hiroshima Sensei was really excited about those ideas.
Okay.
And he's trying to find someone to be able to continue those ideas, kind of.
Okay.
And Hiroshima Sensei has his own ideas, right? And so yeah, I had some unfinished research,
Okay.
and then I have my own ideas how to do the next step of the research, and Hiroshima Sensei has his own ideas on how to do it, obviously. And I feel like I think he will ask Ridwan to continue one of those ideas if he accepts, I think. And what I was doing now with the research is that I was trying to compare the kit build with reading the text and without reading the text at the same time. So usually on kit build, most of the research on kit build, you're building the map while reading the text. So you have access to the text while building the map. And so usually you have the printed text. And the other option you have is that you build the map without the text. You cannot read the text. So I did a comparison between those two scenarios. And what I find out is that I actually did something else. Instead of reading the text, I put the text inside the system. So the user can either build the map or he can look at the text. He cannot do both at the same time. The reason why I do that is that way I can put it in the log data. So I can know when the user is reading the text, and then I can know when the user is building the map. And the user can change whenever he wants. And what I find out is that the users who use the text a lot when building the map, they are the users who learn the most. The people who don't use the text so much or are not willing to use the text, they usually forget about the learning gains. But you can do a deeper research on that. You can show, well, it's kind of complicated. I have some thoughts about that. It's a bit not so easy to explain, but I think Ridwan will probably be involved in that research, I think. Unless he doesn't want to. I mean, if Hiroshima Sensei is a very sweet guy, if you say to me that I don't want to do this research, I want to do that research, I don't want to work with this, I want to work with that, he will usually let you do whatever you want. So that means you have a bigger responsibility, but you have freedom in the lab, I believe. Yeah.
Okay. Anyone
I have
else?
some question
Oh, sure.
about some of your research. Actually, I have read some of your papers, including the airplay one. I googled it and found your papers, and I somehow read about it. One thing that I want to ask for you is, what do you think in how to increase the memory retention for using the airplay? Because the funding in your paper is that the memory retention is tend to be lower,
Yeah,
compared to with the standard or the
yeah.
usual kit build tool. So, do you have any maybe idea in how to increase the memory retention by using the airplay?
Okay. So some of the ideas I would try for increasing the retention is, okay, so right now, what I find out is that if you use text while reading the map, you have a higher retention rate. So for the experiment on AirMap, the user could not read the text during viewing the map. So that would be one idea, to let the user use the text and then see what happens, if it gets better, if you get better retention or not. Another thing you can do is something that Ando did on his research, which is you have the propositions and then you try to connect the propositions to the text, to the sentences in the text. So when you have this kind of activity, when you have an extra activity, not just reading the map, connecting the map to the text, the user will have to think about more things and then they will be able to learn more, possibly. Another approach you could think about doing is, so there is a guy in the lab, he's not there anymore, but he was a Thailand guy, Jalwat, his name. So if you look up his papers, you can probably find him. I think his last name is Pilai.
Yes, Jarwat Pilai.
Yeah, so if you look for his papers, he has something kind of similar to what Ando did, but a little bit different, where he shows the proposition, he shows a portion of the text, and then he asks the student, did the proposition you made make sense? Do you want to think more about it? Do you want to change your map, etc., etc., etc.? So there are a couple of things you can do about that to try to make the students think more deeply and try to improve memory retention there. Another thing you could maybe do is like have multiple maps, multiple texts, separate the map into multiple parts or something like that and see what happens. Yeah, there's a lot of things you can do with KitView or IMAP, I believe.
About adding the ability to show the text while building the map, does it the kit build tool, the standard kit build tool, I think it is already showing the text about the material. So what is the difference between your last research about that with the standard kit build?
Okay, so it's a bit complicated because there are two types of research, right? There's a type of research when you're trying to show a new activity. You say that I never did this activity before, this is a completely new activity. And there's another type of research, which is explaining how people learn, right? So, like you said before, maybe people are already doing that. They already have the kit built with the text. But that's the thing. Are you worried about making a new activity, or are you trying to show how people learn? Because if you're just trying to show how people learn, you can do something that has been used before. But what you're doing is a new comparison, right? So if you compare AirMap without text and AirMap with text, that's a new analysis you can do, right? And sometimes you want to build a new activity, you want to build a new thing, like we have this new thing which is really good, etc., etc., etc. But sometimes you have like this thing already exists, people are already using this thing, but I changed this thing just a little bit, and it's a new thing, but sorry, it's not a new thing, it's a different thing. So this new different thing isn't necessarily innovative, isn't necessarily better, isn't necessarily technologically impressive. But when you compare the two, you get a new knowledge about how people learn. And so those are the two types of research you can do, right? You can either build something new, technologically interesting. Like, for example, Audio's research, he does a hybrid of AI and manual building of the map, and his approach is new. Nobody has done, not nobody. Okay, so some people did something similar, but it's kind of new, it's kind of hot. But you can also do something that is not new, that is not hot, but you compare those two things and you try to see the difference between thinking, the difference between learning, etc., etc. And then, because for AirMap, I got one reviewer who said, sorry, but the only thing you did was made the layout automatic, and this algorithm you used is not new, it's not impressive. So it's an engineering speaking, in an engineering perspective, your research is really simple. why should we publish this paper? And then I explained to the guy that, yes, it's simple. I'm not saying it's complicated. I don't care about making something complicated. What I wanted to show is that what happens when you have automatic layout? Do people think differently? Do people learn differently? I don't care if automatic layout is new or older, etc., etc. What I want to know is it interesting to automatic layout? And is it interesting to automatic layout? So usually my research, in particular, the way I like to do research, I usually don't like to do the new thing because honestly, if you want to do the new thing, you probably came, from my opinion, you came to the wrong lab because the lab in Hiroshima Sensei's lab, usually you have very simple, technologically speaking, you have very simple research. You don't have the latest technology. So for me, it's easier to talk about the difference in thinking, the difference in deep thinking, shallow thinking, memory, etc., instead of thinking about what is new and what is not new. That's how I feel, at least.
But about the research idea, if maybe I have some idea, but it is a simple idea, like you said before. The idea doesn't have to be complicated, doesn't have to be technologically advanced.
Yeah.
It might be a simple idea or simple feature addition. So how about your supervisor, or maybe our supervisor? In this case is Professor Tsukasa Hirashima. And how about the approval of from him? Because it is a simple experiment, a simple feature. How to, what do you say, to how to make him
Convince.
approve.
Convince.
Yeah, convince him about the research.
The idea.
The last experiment I did in the lab, my supervisor was Hiroshima Sensei, not Hayashi Sensei. So the last experiment I did in the lab was the simplest experiment anyone has ever done in the lab, I think. So the only thing I had is kit build without text and kit build with text. But when I say text, I mean text inside the software. So nobody had ever done text inside the software, I think, in the lab. But I didn't pretend that it's something new, right? Because nobody cares. I mean, it's just the text inside the software. I didn't pretend it's something new. What I did talk about is that this experiment has never been done before. It's a very dumb idea. It's a very simple idea. And I was a bit concerned about that. I wanted to do the experiment because I was curious. I was actually curious about the results. And I was a bit concerned, can I do that experiment? Isn't it going to be too simple? And then I talked to Hiroshima Sensei, and I was like, okay, I'm thinking about doing this experiment. I think it's a very dumb experiment, but I feel like the results would be interesting. I'm curious about the results. What do you think? And then at first, he was also a bit like, how can I say? He was a bit, can we really do this? But then after we start talking about it, we start getting excited about the results and start getting excited about how the people would think about the difference between the two systems, the mental differences. And then we got excited about the idea, and then we just did the experiment. So what I usually find with Hiroshima Sensei is that if he can get excited about very small things, because we think about the change is small, but the difference in thinking can be big. And then we get really excited talking about the difference in thinking. And if you can talk about that, you can usually do research well for Hiroshima Sensei. On the other hand, we have a lot of people who come to the lab and then they want to use deep learning, they want to use the latest technology. And usually Hiroshima Sensei is not so comfortable with that because he doesn't have a background in this latest technology stuff. And he's also not interested. So it is a bit about the interest of the supervisor, right? And he is usually very excited about those small experiments that can have big repercussions in thinking. That's my experience with Hiroshima Sensei.
Okay. Thank you. It was reassuring.
Oh, I'm glad.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Maybe Afif would like to ask.
Pedro,
What's up?
I think your research is very hard in terms of the administrative matter. especially for permissions in for the experiments, right? In especially in Japan,
Yeah,
you have problem.
yeah,
That's you as you mentioned in your presentations. The design and in my research is just focusing on the analyzing log data.
yeah,
That's why I'm on the time for graduation.
yeah, yeah. Oh no, I think our fifth is a model for the lab. Everybody should do research like that. Just analyze the log. It's the best idea.
Okay, I'm interested in the very beginning of your presentations. You mentioned about open information structure.
Ah, yeah,
There is also uh, be like uh, the soul of our
yeah.
labs means. Can you elaborate uh, in the simple way? What is the what is the definitions, or maybe you can use the examples in your study case in the Monshakun for early childs and using a picture or something.
Okay.
That is the open information structures is that is an have one meaning, or we can divide like what's the meaning of structures, informations, and the open, like that's can you elaborate that? Maybe this is the one I'm interested in because uh, any applications,
Yeah,
if we base on that kind of open information structures, I
yeah,
think there is a what the senses labs background. I think. So
yeah.
and you and also can you connect it with the mental model? I can see in your slide you mentioned about the mental model or some things. Maybe you can relate it to that kind of definitions.
Okay, so that's a very pertinent question. I think Hirashima Sensei
Yeah,
would really,
that is a basic the basic question.
yeah, I think Hirashima Sensei would be really happy with that question. I think so. Usually, when you're trying to learn something, you have a learning subject, right? The learning subject is here, and okay, so usually what we do is that we have this subject, and then we want to build an information structure that represents that subject. Okay,
Mm.
and what we have is that, for example, Mosako, the information structure is made up of three sentences, right? And then each sentence has like a number, etc. It's a bit complicated, and usually for each learning subject, you have to build a different information structure. And for Kit build, the information structure is a concept map. For Mosako, the information structure is called the triplet structure model, which Hiroshima Sensei and Hash Sensei have described it in a lot of details, etc., etc. And the details of the information structure, it can help explain how people learn about things, right? And so what we have usually is that we have the learning subject, and then we have information structure that we have to define. We, the researcher, the software developer, has to define the information structure. And then usually you break that structure into pieces. And then you give those pieces to the students, and then you ask them to rebuild the structure themselves. So for the conceptual models, the mental representation models, so we have a bunch of people in the past who think that inside our brain there are information structures inside our brain, and we cannot prove that. We don't know if it's true or not. But people say that we have those information structures in our brain. Not everybody says that. Only some researchers say that. But if we think about that, Hiroshima Sensei tries to draw a parallel between building the information structure and thinking. So for Hiroshima Sensei, building that information structure using those pieces is the same thing as understanding the subject. So what Hiroshima Sensei says is that when you work with those pieces, you are externalizing the thought process. So basically, thought happens inside your brain, right? The teacher cannot see what the student is thinking about, but the teacher can see how the student moves the pieces. And because those pieces are very well defined, we can analyze those pieces. So if you look at active research, he has like those graphs, right? So each graph is one possible uh, combination of pieces. And what Hiroshima Sensei likes to argue is that navigating those bubbles, those spaces, is the same thing as navigating what the student is thinking about. So the reason why most of them works really well with that is because you have a lot of possible states, but on kit build you have a lot more states. And the thing about Mosokun is that the student is navigating those pieces, those spaces, and then he can go back and forth and da da da. And we also find that because the information structure is so well defined in Mosokun, we can talk about constraints, we can talk about different types of pieces, different types of stories, how many errors they make, so we can say this error breaks those rules, those constraints, but this error breaks only those constraints, blah 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 blah. And then we can explain very well, very specifically, just by using the log data, just by using this navigation, and then we can try to explain what the student understands and what the student doesn't understand. Like maybe for this bubble, the student is only looking at the numbers. So he makes this mistake because he looks at the numbers. He's not looking at the object, for example. But maybe that student got the object right, but he doesn't look at the numbers. So anyways, we can classify the students based on what kind of mistakes they made, what kind of things they made. And the reason why we can do that is because we have defined the information structure in a very deep way. And from my point of view, the reason why we cannot do that with KitView is because KitView, every class is a different map, has a different thing. Every subject has a different map, and that map is kind of shallow. It's not defined so deeply, and it's a bit harder to do the analysis of the log data there. But yeah, the basic thing about the open information structure approach is that you define an information structure based on the learning subject, you divide that into pieces, and then the student tries to build something using those pieces, and then he tries to build the original structure. And by doing that, you will have the correct information structure inside his brain. I guess that's kind of the theory, I think.
Yeah. So the word opens in here.
Yeah.
What's the meaning of so
Okay.
information
So,
structure? You already explained about it. So in here the words opens in front of.
yeah, the word is open because what Hiroshima Sensei really wants to say is that you can see it. Because if for usual learning, the student tries to understand something, and sometimes your student will understand it, sometimes the student will not understand it, but we cannot see what the student is thinking about, right? But what Hiroshima Sensei tries to argue is that by having a very well-defined information structure, and we want to believe that it's the same structure as the one inside the student's mind, we can see through the log data what the student is moving, right? And what we want to argue is that the movement the student does is equivalent to be able to understand what the student is thinking about. So what we want to argue is that the information structure, at least that's my interpretation. I don't know if freshman system has a similar interpretation or not, but the reason why it's open is because we can actually see the movements. We can actually see how the student is trying to solve the problems. And then that means we can kind of take a look at what the student is thinking about. And we cannot do that with traditional learning because we cannot see what the student is thinking about, right? We can only see, for example, the answer, but we don't care about the answer. We care about the process, right? So
Okay.
that's why Rashmi says it's open, because we can actually see it through the analysis of the log data.
Okay. So the word opens in here is more like see. So that's why I see before that sometimes since I use the words externalize, right?
Yes, exactly.
Externalize it. So that's why we can see
Yes,
what's in what the student thinkings in their mind. So we can
yes.
analyze it. Okay, so okay, like let go to the your projects about the Monsakuns in kindergarten. You use some visual, right?
Yeah.
Pictures, the images. So
Yes.
what do you think about the learning styles? I mean, as you know, if I can mention about the learning styles, maybe you can heard you have already heard about that students can be okay, visuals and then auditory and then kinesthetics and so on. So
Okay.
yeah, so of course not all the students can be easily understands about the visuals
Yes.
representations.
Yes.
Maybe some of them can be only can what is it easy learns using sound maybe about
Yeah.
the and then also with some nice statistics with the do some things in the maybe in the PD physicals or some things. What do you think about it?
I agree. So one thing I was talking about with Hiroshima Sensei is that we use this system with the pictures for the very young students, but I feel like the older students will also be able to benefit because, like you said, one approach we can do is have an experience more focused on sound, an experience more focused on pictures, or even let the student decide like, does he want to go with the sound? Does he want to interact with the pictures? Does he want to change between pictures and text or something like that? Or we can also have a progression, like we start from pictures and then go to text, or maybe you start from text and go to pictures, or maybe you have both at first. I mean, it's always a trade-off, right? Because if you have both pictures and text, sometimes it's too much information. But like I said, some people prefer pictures, some people prefer text. Maybe having both picture and text is easier. Maybe it's harder. So there was a lot of research we can still do with this, I believe. So yeah, I definitely feel like approaching this kind of learning style, like prioritizing sound, prioritizing image, prioritizing text, it would create a more customizable experience for the student, I believe.
Yeah, yeah.
I feel like that would be
That's why I'd like to say in here is that uh, that is uh, uh, depend on the learning subjects. The first,
yeah,
it can be the different information structures, and then also uh, it is also depend on somehow we don't know our approach is maybe fits with the kind of students or we can use another approach with the because for maybe on the group of students in the one schools will be faced a different way
yeah.
in the different schools. So maybe it's also can be research and another research to more detail about it.
I think so too.
So we can build some application. What kind of application will would like to build and fit, and also we can refine in some cyclic experiments that we
Yeah,
can add some text or add some hints or add
yeah,
some things that can also that makes the applications more fits to the students.
yeah,
Maybe we can also relate it to self-regulated learnings
yeah,
or some things.
yeah. I believe so too. I feel like this would be a hot research topic. Would
Yes,
let the student
adaptive
regulate how they want
learnings
to.
also maybe adaptive learnings,
Yes,
intelligence tutoring system or something.
I think so too. I think that would be a very interesting direction to go for this research. I think so.
Hmm.
So it's I have a lot of question in my mind basically because it is very delightful to have a lot of discussion and conversation with Pedro, of course. Okay, and one thing in my mind is, what do you think about adaptive uh, approach or adaptive structures regarding the use of kit build uh, I also thinking about what have Jarwat done, conduct in his previous research, and it is very interesting regarding if we are talking about the adaptive system learning. And I believe, besides your explanation regarding to what will Ridwan do in the lab, I also concerned about this kind of situation because, correct me if I'm wrong, kit build is not meant to be showing the correct answer directly, showing the answers directly to the student. And that kind of situation make it hard than the Monsakun side because whatever you do in Monsakun, you will always end up in having a correct answers, right?
Yeah.
Unlike kit build, it is not necessarily for you to have a correct answers.
Yes.
So it makes it quite difficult, I think, in my opinion, to give a proper feedback or giving a. But it's challenging than the Monsakun. So I hope maybe Ridwan will solve it in the future in his research maybe. And hopefully he have some time to meet Arius in the lab and have a lot of fruitful discussion. And yes, I kind of wait for having a lot of what's say measures improvement of kit build. And yes, adaptive learning is quite interesting subject, and I believe it will be the game changers in the future. So it is not only how to construct or not only how to create learning activities, but it is also how to create an autonomous feedback, adaptive learning situation. So it can fit for every student's way of thought or every student gain or something else. Uh, and let's see. Yes. Okay. So, do you guys have any? And about your, I also think about is it any possibilities that your research regarding to the kindergarten Monsakun can be used in Indonesia or something? Or
Sure. I mean,
I don't
I
know.
just, oh, uh, I think, I don't remember. Anyways, the log date, the source code, I can either give it to you, or I think I gave it to a guy in the lab, but I'm not remember it exactly. But yeah, if you guys ask, I think the file, but there's a small problem. Oh, there's a big problem actually. The audio data is not happening.
Yes, just because it is very interesting because you don't have to translate the pictures. The
Yeah, but
pictures.
the sound is
Yes. I know the sound is. Maybe we can figure it out, but in the basics things or in the basic meaning, it's for your research is only use the visual.
yeah.
The stress out of your research, okay, and also using the sound to give some more explanation, right?
Yeah.
But the main point of your research is how to visualize the text itself, so it will be easier for the kindergarten student to learn mathematics something. I believe it's quite interest, not quite. It's a interesting topic or subject that need further research or experiment. And I believe we are lucky to have Mr. Arif Hidayat here, who already used the Monsakun math problem in Indonesia, and it is for the elementary school. But it will also be interesting if we can use your Monsakun for kindergarten to be used in Indonesia also, because many things that we can discover about kindergarten, because it's a I don't know. I think a lot of unanswered question in your
Yeah,
previous research regarding to some limitation.
yeah.
So yes, I think, in my opinion, maybe if we can continue your research regarding to the use of Mansakun, and I believe we can answer a lot of question that can complete the puzzle. I think maybe. So yes, maybe not now. Maybe someday or in the future. Is it okay if so who should I ask permission for if I wanted to use the Monsakun for kindergarten? Should I ask the permission directly from the lab, or I don't know.
I have no idea.
Maybe okay. Maybe we can
But
somehow.
send an email to Hiroshima Sensei. He would say,
Yes. But we need to setting up the environment first, and
yeah. That's kind of complicated, right?
yes, it's not just only an idea and then stop. We have to have a better preparation. So I think. Okay. So do do any of you have any question, or Mr.
So
Arifid?
yeah, we still have a time.
Yes. Of course, we still have time.
So maybe it's a little bit useful for read one maybe. But I want to ask to Pedro. But maybe the answer will be useful for read one. So maybe I don't know. I was away from my keyboard for a while, so maybe the question has been asked before. So you use the Amazon Mechanical Turk, right?
Yes,
Instead of doing the experiment directly in school,
yes,
like us.
yes.
So what is the benefits and what is the drawback of
So,
using Amazon Mechanical Turk?
okay,
So, for
so
example, like maybe Ridwan will have some experiment for his research. So maybe he will do the experiment with real human, but
yeah.
which one is better for him to do the experiment? Either they use, will use the Amazon Mechanical Turk, or it's better to use real class, like yeah, like the others. Yeah, maybe that's my questions.
Well, if you're doing research with kit build, most research in kit build can be done with grown-ups, right? So I feel like the biggest drawback of a mechanical Turk is that you cannot use children, you cannot use teenagers. So that's would be one drawback. But for kit build, I don't think that's a drawback. Another thing that's kind of hard to do with Amazon Mechanical Turk is, like, for example, I think Maya is trying to do a very long-term experiment, like many sections, many things. So the more sessions you have, the harder it is to do it with Amazon Mechanical Turk. I had 2 sessions, and I usually lose a little bit less than half the participants through each session because not everybody comes back, right? So that would be one problem. And I feel like there are some technological issues that there need to be tackled, but I feel like Norris will maybe tackle those things by working with you in the new kit build. Because you built a system, right, Ariel, for the experiment, right? To put the whole experiment inside the system. And the only thing that needs to be done now is to change some details for it to work well with Amazon Mechanical Turk. And I think Noras is working on that right now, I think. So I feel like that would be one of the biggest issues. And I don't know. It depends if you're doing the experiment in the classroom. there are so many variables you cannot control, right? If you have a very good teacher that you can work with, that you can collaborate with, well, maybe doing the experiment in the classroom is more helpful. Maybe the teacher will help you have ideas to get a better experiment. Maybe he will, I don't know, give you a very cool idea for how to analyze things. But I feel like if you don't have an amazing teacher to help you with in the class, it's just better to go from as a mechanical turk because it's just less headache. It's just less problems. And if you have a system that can work well with a mechanical turk, usually you have a very robust system, kind of. You have a system that's very independent because, yeah, you have a system optimized for the experiment. You won't have like just a tool for learning. It's more like a tool built to make experiments. And I feel like that will make a more controlled environment for the experiment. I don't know. I'm just a big fan of doing experiments on Amazon Computer. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Regarding AMT or Amazon Mechanical Turk, so it seems like if we need to perform an experiment for a teacher, it seems that it is impossible to perform the experiment in AMT. Or is there any trick to use AMT if we need to perform experiment that involving a teacher? What do you think about it?
What do you mean? Sorry, I didn't.
So the kit build tool is a tool that can be used to the student and
Yeah.
also can be used to the teacher.
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
So if somehow we need to perform an experiment that involves a teacher,
Yeah.
how can we use AMT for that purpose?
Well, it depends on why you want to involve the teacher. I hate it. So I don't really like to work with teachers. Like I don't like to. I try to limit as much as I can the number of people I have to work with, because the more people you have to work with, the more time you have to wait. You have to discuss. You have to. There's so much. That's just my style, right? But if you want to involve a teacher, it depends on why you want to involve a teacher, right? Because if you want to have a class, if you want the teacher to teach the class on Amazon Mechanical Turk, I don't think that would be possible. Maybe if you have a video class or something, but if you want to do a real-time class, it's not possible because the thing about Amazon Mechanical Turk is that everybody will do the experiment at a different time. Oh, right, that's another drawback of Amazon Mechanical Turk. You cannot do collaboration on Amazon Mechanical Turk because everybody will do the task at the time they want to do the task. So if you want to do, like Ariel recently did an experimental collaboration, you cannot do that on Amazon Mechanical Turk. It's just impossible. So yeah, that would be one thing you cannot do. And if you want to do something with a teacher, depending on what you want to do, it's not possible. If you want the teacher to help you analyze the data or something like that, or maybe prepare the material, that's okay. But if you want the teacher to interact with the students, that's not possible. Yeah. But I don't feel like that's a drawback. I feel like that's an advantage. Not being able to work with teachers is, in my opinion, an advantage because you have less friction, you have less time with.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So it seems like if somehow we need to involve teacher, maybe it is best to conduct a traditional experiment with real class.
Yeah, I guess so.
Maybe, in my opinion, is it possible to describe the the, the job description or the people who took should only be a teachers? Is it a possible way to use the Amazon Turk in that kind of situation?
I think that would be really complicated. I don't.
Okay, so it will be complicated, but
If you want to target teachers, I don't think that's possible.
so let's say the one who I need to conduct the experiment is the one, the profession should be a teacher or something. Is it possible?
Maybe you can find an option like that, but then there are so many types of teachers, right? You have English teachers, you have, like, I don't think it would be. I don't think it would be interesting.
But the condition is possible to be applied, right?
I think so, but you probably have to pay more. It would be a little bit more complicated. I'm not sure if you can get the participants in the first place.
So you will have to wait longer.
Yeah.
Long time. Yes, because you have a certain limitation for your experiment. Okay.
Yeah.
But it's
I
possible.
feel like instead of trying to force Amazon Mechanical Turk to do something you wanted to do, in my opinion, it's better to change the experiment, change the research into something that you can use. That's
Okay. Yes,
my
yes.
clear opinion.
Yes. I understand. Okay, thank you, thank you. Okay. Arka, maybe you have some question.
I'm sorry. Sensei is calling me.
Okay, okay, okay.
Okay, so I need to talk with Sensei.
Okay, thank you.
Betul.
Bye bye.
Okay, thank you very much, Aryan. Okay, do any of you have any question? No. So okay. Okay, I think it was a very interesting and fruitful discussion that we have, and hopefully in the future I can invite you again, Pedro, to have some more discussion regarding to the anything. I believe you have a very, in my opinion, you are the person with open-minded person that we can have a lot of discussion regarding to any subjects. So in based on that case or based on that situation, I hope someday you will agree to be invited into this discussion again. I hope so. Is it okay? Of course, as long as it's not bothering your working situation.
Sure.
Some things. So,
Are you working online?
Yeah, I work hybrid. Sometimes
hybrid.
going to the company, sometimes online. Hybrid. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Hey
So,
guys, thanks a lot. Have fun.
thanks a lot, Pedro, for your time. I really, really appreciate it. And
Peace.
yes, and for the final thought, is it okay if I publish our discussion?
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Okay.
No problem.
And if somehow is it okay if I ask of your for your presentation some file or something else,
Sure.
so I can share it into my lab and maybe people can read about it and have some thought, and we try to compile a lot of resources to be used, and maybe it will be helpful for us in the futures.
Sure.
To thank you very much, Pedro, for your time and your kindness as usual. Hopefully we can meet. Hopefully I can go to Tokyo someday and we can have a lot of discussion.
Sure, sure.
I heard that this year in Hiroshima, Sensei will hold some conference.
I don't know.
Oh, you don't know.
Maybe Aryo is the
Yeah,
one.
maybe already.
But he's already gone.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Pedro, for your time. I do really appreciate it,
You guys.
and hopefully this can make us our friendship last longer. And thank you very much for everyone who's already joining this discussion, and hopefully all of you can have also will be joining to our future discussion, and we will also invite a lot of people to share their experience. Okay, thank you very much, and goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and
Good luck, guys.
Bye. Thank you.
stay healthy.
You too, man.